Very good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Before we jump in, let me know how excited I am to be with you today for this one-of-a-kind ChemDraw Connect. To prepare it, I read historical articles, digged into our archives, and liaised with a number of people who were there when ChemDraw was born exactly 40 years ago. My name is Nicolas Triballeau. I'm marketing lead for ChemDraw at Revvity Signals, and I'll be your host today. A couple of housekeeping points before we start. This session is being recorded and will be available for streaming at revvitysignals.com/chemdraw-connect. Please submit your questions and comments during this session through the questions panel located at the top of your screen. As always, we want to hear from you. If you have any topics suggested for our ChemDraw Connect webinar series, feel free to reach out to me on signals.events@revvity.com. Thank you. So our agenda for today is it's a bit storytelling about this 40th anniversary, about the history of ChemDraw, and how ChemDraw became what it is today. So first off, we'll go on board for a trip back to 1984, 1985. Then we'll listen to famous chemists sharing insights into ChemDraw's impact on chemistry and beyond. Then we'll have an exclusive interview with a key stakeholder sharing behind the scene stories. And finally, as promised, we will have the 40th anniversary chemistry quiz. Let's jump in. So before computer-based programs for structured drawings came about, these are the kinds of tools that chemists had to use. These sort of plastic templates that you see here in green, this one was called Feather Triangle. So you would use a pen and draw those rings with these hexagon, pentagons, and heptagons shaped, so that you could actually communicate about your chemistry. Typically, also, if you wanted to publish, you would have to use these dry transfer letter decals or these Leroy lettering sets, which were really complicated to use and quite intensive to actually draw even a simple diagram or a simple reaction for your molecules. Though, if you were patient enough and careful enough, this is the kind of drawing you could obtain. And you see, it was quite qualitative and quite nice to actually read. Although a bit of irregularities, that was also already pretty clear for communication. But the problem was it was taking a lot of time for the chemists. So that means times that they cannot spend at the bench, of course, and doing their research. So now let's describe the scene a little bit. We are in 1983 in the summer, and David Evans, who was a professor in organic chemistry, was at Caltech at this time, and he decided to give a little refresh in his research program by changing environment and moved to from Caltech to Harvard with his wife Sally, who you see here. So Sally was a science teacher, and because it was summer 1983, she did not have the time, of course, to find a job near Harvard when they actually moved during the summertime. So what she offered was to, help David set up the lab and also do a bit of administrative work, which was including, these drawings for all the compounds and the reactions that David's and his lab were actually doing at the time. So it was indeed a complicated task for Sally, who was, an intellectual woman, to actually draw all these little rings, these molecules one at a time, and having to restart again because, well, she was going to draw the next molecule in the reaction with just one little modification. And this is the kind of molecule actually David Evans was investigating at the time. So this is vancomycin. And you can imagine the frustration of Sally having to draw that molecule again and again with only a slight modification. And whenever she had actually made a little mistake, well, she had to start all over again to draw that particular compound. So she shared this frustration to one of the students who was at a lab nearby, and this is Stuart Rubinstein. So she approached Stuart because she knew he had computing skills and he might be able to write a little program for her. Unfortunately, there was nothing available at the moment, in terms of hardware that could actually support this kind of requests. And well, here came the revolution. We are at the beginning of 1984.
Introducing Macintosh. It does all the things you'd expect a business computer to do. It does a lot of things you wouldn't expect a business computer to do. And it does some things no other business computer has ever done before. Of course, to do all this, you will have to learn to do this. Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us.
So this was the first Macintosh that was released beginning of 1984, and it was actually a revolution.
Introducing Macintosh.
It was actually providing
Introducing
users a
Macintosh.
graphical interface with a mouse, a folder hierarchy, and a Windows system, including an affordable price. Sorry about that. So that changes the game a lot, because with this Macintosh came a number of programs, including MacDraw and MacPaint. And when actually David, Sally Evans, and Stuart Rubinstein saw this, they immediately realized that they could actually capitalize on these tools to actually create the first chemical drawing program. So why is that? Well, you can see in here in this image of MacPaint that you had a set of tools on the side, like a little lasso, a little selection, the letter A for even typing something on screen, and different kind of shapes like rectangles and ellipses. So, well, what is chemical drawing at the very core of it if it's not drawing different shapes like hexagons and pentagons, as I was mentioning it? So what Stuart did at this time actually was actually a version of MacDraw, MacPaint that was having these kind of features, including those shapes that chemists need to draw these kinds of molecules. Of course, he also worked on extra features such as the arrows, which were there from the very beginning, different styles of arrows, right? If you want to represent a reaction, an equilibrium, or a mechanism, right, of a reaction. So if you compare, right, the image that you see on screen, you also have the lasso, the selection, the eraser, and the little A to draw some text also on the screen, including those shapes that I was mentioning. So that was, the very first version of ChemDraw, actually a beta version. So now let me take you back in time. So I'd like to invite you on board, of Doc Brown's time machine, the famous DeLorean, and go back exactly 40 years ago. So we're on Wednesday, 17th of July, 1985. It's a rainy day in New Hampton, so the chemist attending the Gordon conference there had to stay indoors. The disappointment at missing a pleasant walk outside was short-lived, however, because they were about to witness a revolution in how they communicated their discoveries. So there, David, Sally Evans stood behind Stuart Rubinstein, who was demonstrating something important on the screen of his newly acquired Macintosh 512K. It was the beta version I was mentioning of ChemDraw, and that is going to change everything for chemists. So in front of a captivated audience, Stuart was able to draw molecules with high quality in less than a minute. On top of that, he could duplicate it with a simple copy-paste, like just 2 seconds instead of 20 minutes. So every chemist at the conference vividly remember that moment. I have a few examples to share with you. The first being Stuart Schreiber. He was there. So Stuart, he's a renowned chemical biologist. He was there, a professor at Yale, and he saw the demo. And he remembered that the impact of seeing ChemDraw on Macintosh computer was dramatic and immediate. And in fact, the combination of the Macintosh computer and ChemDraw clearly demanded next day adoption. So after the end of the conference, he rushed home in New Haven and he placed his order. So since then, Schreiber holds the distinction of being the first person to purchase ChemDraw. Another renowned chemist who was there at the time was Derek Lowe. So I'm going to share with you some of his impression. For those of you who don't know Derek, he's actually a renowned medicinal chemist. is author of a popular blog called In the Pipeline. So let's listen to a recording of Derek that that we had done 10 years ago when we invited him for the 30th anniversary.
I'm of the generation that I started graduate school, and by the time I did my continuation exam, and for those of you who haven't been through it, the continuation exam is where they look at what you've been doing so far for your first year and a half or so of graduate school, and they tell you to go forth and get a PhD, or they tell you to go forth and take a master's, or sometimes they just flat out tell you to go forth. I did my continuation exam pre-ChemDraw, just barely, but pre-ChemDraw, which meant that I used one of those green templates, and I used the rub-on letters, the letraset stuff, and the little metal ball on the holder and everything, and that's how you did it. That's how everyone had always done their structures. So I overlapped, however briefly, with that era. Then, within a few months, ChemDraw had come out. Now, the difference between letraset and templates and scratching your structures into a tablet of dried buffalo dung with a stick and drying it in the sun, the difference between letraset and that is much smaller than the difference between letraset and ChemDraw. And you had to be there. I know that's an irritating phrase. I know people get tired of hearing that, especially as you get older, you use it more and more. My kids are really tired of hearing it. But you had to be there because I had been there before ChemDraw was available. And the first time I saw it demoed, I can still remember the room and where I was standing and watching someone draw out a cyclohexane chair, rotate it around, resize, copy, paste, slap, 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 and then save it onto a floppy disk. Now, the phrase killer app gets used a lot. It's a cliche. But these days, when everyone is surrounded by hardware, when everyone has smartphones and laptops and computers everywhere, you have to remember what the original idea of a killer app was. A killer app was something that made you go out and buy the hardware. It made you go out and buy something you didn't even have anything like because you had to have this thing. If you've ever read Stephen Levy's book, Hackers, which is about the early days of personal computers, a very good history of that, VisiCalc was the killer app for the Apple II computer when it came out. I don't think any of us have ever done a spreadsheet by hand. I remember my father doing one when he was working, keeping up the books for his dental office back in the early 70s. Big old, wide, yellow tablet of paper, columns written in by hand, and if you want to multiply column 3 by column 4, you sat down and multiplied every cell and wrote it in. So when small businessmen or accountants saw VisiCalc working, the first spreadsheet, filling in the columns, they said, I must have this right now. I don't care. And they'd go into stores and say, I want a VisiCalc. I say, well, that runs on this computer code. I don't care. I want that. That's what I felt when I saw ChemDraw running. It was like, okay, I've got to have this. And I did. That was in 1985, and I immediately started using ChemDraw. About 1990 or so, I paid for it. So I got around to it. But it was not too hard to get a hold of. But it spread like wildfire, and it created a relationship between organic chemistry and Apple hardware that still exists to this day. But believe me, every chemist, every grad student or postdoc or professor who saw ChemDraw working at that point in 85, 86 was like, I have to have this immediately because it was so clearly necessary, so clearly superior to every other alternative that was out there. And I've only had that feeling a couple of other times. I had it with chemistry in graduate school when I first got a chance to use STN Online, the command line precursor to SciFinder. It was like having magic powers. That's a killer app, is when you look at it and you go, holy crap, I've turned into a superior being just by having this stuff. Now, the key difference was something like with STN Online, we had the 90% academic discount, otherwise we could never have afforded it, of course, because it was exorbitantly expensive. And you had one user per group that was the guru of it, and I was the designated guru for STN Online. So people came to me to do the searches after 5 p.m. when the discount kicked in. Of course, we were there anyway. And I well remember having one of my fellow grad students say, okay, search this, peckety, 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 peck, all the command line stuff. Up come a row of references. She goes, oh, that's it, that's the paper I need. Well, I decided to have some fun with her. So I said, oh, that's a problem, Helen. She said, what? I said, you see this JPC? Well, it was like Journal of Physical Chemistry. I said, that means Journal of Pakistani Chemistry. She goes, what? I said, yeah, you see this UR? That means it's written in Urdu. I don't think she believed me for the rest of her graduate school career. If I told her it was raining, she'd go, yeah, right, sure. 11 a.m.? Yeah, you'd like for me to think that, wouldn't you? So, but that was the key, was you had to have one guru per group to do this because it was so esoteric and so expensive. ChemDraw, on the other hand, was for everybody, especially if you're copying it. It was for everybody. Everyone could use it. Everyone picked up the use of it immediately. It was extremely intuitive, even if you hadn't used a Mac before, and God knows in 1985 a lot of people hadn't. But it was like, this is the way this should be done. And people gleefully threw away their old templates and letter sets and all that. So I still have that in my files on my continuation exam on some increasingly yellowing sheets of paper, which was rather depressing to see because I wonder what other parts of me are oxidizing that quickly. And there it is, the stuff that I sketched out. And if you wanted to copy, you went to the damned copier. And if you wanted to resize, dip, you did that on the copier. And you carefully used matte type Scotch tape because that didn't give you reflections when you recopied, and so on and so on. It was primitive and it was brutal. So I still use ChemDraw. I've got ChemDraw running on my laptop over there. I used ChemDraw yesterday afternoon. I use it all the time. It's second nature to me. It's second nature to every organic chemist.
All right. So to illustrate the evolution of ChemDraw, we also partnered with another fantastic science communicator and infographics designer, no other than Andy Bruning from Compound Interest. So here is it. He is going to publish it also today through his blog channels. This is the timeline of the evolution of ChemDraw he had prepared of us. On this chart, he indicates some of the key evolution of ChemDraw since this first demo of 1985 that I was talking about. So as you remember, it was originally for Macintosh. As the number of Windows users was increasing significantly in the 90s, Cambridge decided that we should also develop a version for Windows. And so they did it in 1993. Later, in 1997, several chemical intelligence tools were added to ChemDraw, such as the ability to predict NMR spectrum, pKa, log-P, and also the famous structure to name and name to structure functionality. Later in the 2000s, we had the mass spectroscopy. In 2014, this is where ChemDraw was first integrated to a famous database. This is SciFinder. Later, we also had integration with Elsevier Reaxys and others. At the end of the 1910s, 1919, we had these coloring features with ring coloring and later bonds and atom colors. We also had introduced Helm as a functionality for ChemDraw, right? That is this ability to represent complex biomolecules, so artificial peptides, oligonucleotides, and so forth. Lately, actually, it was last year, we released Signals ChemDraw, which is a cloud-powered version of ChemDraw that allow users to store, access, and edit their structures from anywhere. You just need a web browser. You don't need to install actually a desktop program anymore with Signals ChemDraw. So after 40 years, most of the people who founded the company have left, of course, but some have been with us for more than 25 years, actually. And this is the case of David Gonzalez, who is now Chief Strategy Officer at Revvity Signals and graciously accepted our invitation for an interview. Let's listen to David. We are honored to welcome David Gonzalez, Chief Strategy Officer of Revvity Signals, for this special conversation. David brings a unique perspective, having joined CambridgeSoft in 1998 and witnessed firsthand the evolution of ChemDraw through multiple corporate transformations, from CambridgeSoft to Perkin-Elmer and now to Revvity Signals. So with over 25 years of experience with the platform, David offers us invaluable insights into both the history and future directions of this essential chemistry tool. David, you've been with ChemDraw for over 2 decades. Could you share some pivotal moments in ChemDraw's evolution that you've witnessed, for instance, since you joined CambridgeSoft in 1988, and how these changes reflected broader shifts in chemistry research and education?
Hi, Nico. Thank you for having me. Yes, of course, it's been a number of years with the organization, and I've seen several key changes. I would highlight the first one was right before my time. And that's when ChemDraw moved from the Mac to Windows. So originally, ChemDraw was a Mac program. That was the best technology available at the time. And a pivotal change was as Windows started to penetrate our lives, it was important for the CambridgeSoft organization to be able to provide ChemDraw for the Windows platform, because many, especially students, were starting to use Windows, and eventually professionals as well. That happened, I'd say, in 1995 to 1998, just before I joined. When I joined, really, there was both platforms. And one of the key things to the success was that we maintained both platforms. There was a time where we could have abandoned the Mac, but we were very happy that we actually made the commitment to remain on all platforms that were relevant, and that's what happened throughout its history. So Mac and Windows both supported even today. The next wave of change happened when I joined, and it's when CambridgeSoft transformed from a desktop software company to a enterprise level solution company. That came together with the early days of the internet, when we were able to deliver now server-side solutions that run on a web browser. And a key change was making ChemDraw available inside of a browser using the ChemDraw plugin technology and the ActiveX technology. That propelled us into providing solutions that were enterprise level, not used just by a single user on the desktop, but by entire organizations to share and collaborate with data. And that pushed all the way through to the third generation, which was the Signals generation, where it went from cloud and browser-based to software as a service-based. So I would summarize, 3 key changes: the platforms like Windows, the web and the browser, and the enterprise-level software, and now the SaaS and collaboration. And very proud of the fact that CambridgeSoft, Perkin-Elmer, and Revvity were able to transition the technology, right, over 40 years to those changes in platform.
What a fantastic story. ChemDraw has always been known, right, for its user-centric design. How has the feedback loop, between chemists and developers shaped the software over the years? And can you share an example of a significant feature that came directly from user suggestions?
So great question. I think that's at the core of the success of both ChemDraw and in general the Signals organization is even though historically we've always had people in the organization that were scientists. In the early days of CambridgeSoft, even the developers, many of them were chemists or scientists, and we gave priority to understanding the science. The software has to be built by the users. So what's made it successful is that always it was scientists working with the practicing scientists to get the right features into the software. In the early days of ChemDraw, that took the form of a very strong beta program. Right? In desktop software, it was really important to have a cycle of testing by the real users that would ensure the quality of the software. So we had many months, upwards of even 6 months ahead of the release, where we had very active rounds of testing, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, right? And during that engagement, it was a combination of getting the quality into the product for the next release, but most importantly, that was the feeder of all the new features for the following release. As the beta testers were working with the software, they would come back with ideas. They would come back with the capabilities that they needed. I witnessed one of the key transformations there. ChemDraw originally was primarily on the drawing, right? It really was based on Mac Draw, the ability to draw, a molecule, but it didn't have the chemical intelligence initially. right? It didn't understand that a bond was a bond, or that molecular weight was behind the scenes, or that the connectivity, and so forth, or calculations associated with the structure. All that came from users. They were the ones that were saying, "Hey, this is great that now I can draw this molecule, but can you help the program understand what this diagram really means?" Right? That was a real transformational piece of the puzzle, getting the software to begin to have chemical intelligence, and that started, in the mid '90s and hasn't stopped. Right? Every time we add features to the software, they're now over half of them are in the visual representation, but the other half are always in making the software understand the science behind the scenes and be able to do calculations, computations, and modeling behind the scenes.
All right. So ChemDraw has been intelligent for quite a while, right?
It has, and it continues to gain
yes.
intelligence.
So we've seen chemistry, right, move from paper notebooks to electronic lab notebooks and cloud platforms nowadays. How has ChemDraw adapted to support these digital transformations, and what challenges did you face in maintaining the software intuitive nature while expanding its capabilities?
So the key to that digital transformation is related to what I mentioned earlier, of the kind of transition from desktop to enterprise. Right. So from being a tool that's used by a single user to do their work in isolation versus really being collaborative and sharing data across the organization. And from a technology perspective for us, that came with the the browser-based ChemDraw. The majority of the enterprise products that we built at first, our registration system, inventory system, procurement systems, were all browser-based. Right, so we jump right into the browser technology, and the challenge there was, how do you get tools as comprehensive and detailed as ChemDraw to work in a browser? And we always have to fight kind of the it had to be ChemDraw, right? It couldn't be just some reduced capability a chemical viewer or editor within the browser. It had to have the same exact behaviors. Not every feature. We never put every feature of the ChemDraw desktop into the browser-based implementation, but it was critical that there was a continuity between the desktop experience that the single user was doing for their personal work and the work they did in collaboration in the enterprise in the browser. And so that was one of the key challenges. How do you leverage technologies that can ensure the same user experience in very different platforms? There were a couple of technologies that we leveraged in the Windows Microsoft days. The ActiveX technology allowed us to really use very similar code base to give a very similar experience. And then a pivotal moment was in 2015, when we were able to transcompile ChemDraw itself into JavaScript. So what makes ChemDraw.js so fantastic today is that it is really the same code. I like to say bug by bug compatible. If somebody introduces a bug in the desktop product, it's going to show up in the JS product because it is the same exact code base, just transcompiled into JavaScript that runs inside the browser. And of course, I say bug by bug, but that also means feature by feature compatible. So consistency in the user experience, regardless of the platform, has been the secret to that digital transformation that you mentioned.
All right. So, David, many chemists in our audience first encountered ChemDraw as students. How do you view the role of ChemDraw in chemistry education, and how has this relationship between academic institutions and ChemDraw evolved over the years?
I think it's foundational to everything we've done and to our success. It's pretty obvious that if people, in college are using our product, when they become professionals, they'll gravitate to use our product. And when I started in this space, there were probably a dozen companies that were building chemical editors and similar tools to ChemDraw. And then we ended up dominating the market over the years. Part of it because of that engagement early on with the academic communities. To me, what's really rewarding is to see how it went even beyond college, right? So of course, most chemistry college students across the world are exposed to ChemDraw. In most departments provide some level of licensing for their users, and we've worked with those organizations to make sure that it was widely available, affordable, and easy to access for those chemistry communities. But what I love even more is that how it bled into even earlier chemists, the high school communities. I with my own children, where they're in high school, they would come home one day after chemistry class saying that they had seen their teacher in chemistry in high school showing, ChemDraw, and they're very proud that I was involved in the program, right? So it's really remarkable how early and how broadly everybody gets exposed to ChemDraw, and I think that creates a community. A lot of the success of ChemDraw is because people just think, just believe is the best product. They're training it from the beginning, so it continues to be very important in driving the consistency. And another pivotal part of the success of ChemDraw had to do with the adoption of ChemDraw as the standard for many of the publications. Right. So in terms of standardization of the drawings and the formats, we're very fortunate to have many of the key organizations and journals really get behind the ChemDraw standard as a way to represent chemistry in academia and in literature.
Right. So now, David, looking forward, as we celebrate 40 years of ChemDraw, what emerging technologies or trends do you see shaping the next decade of chemical drawing and information management? How might AI, machine learning, or other innovations transform how chemists interact with ChemDraw?
Yeah, so I think we're all seeing an obvious, and a very large impact of AI in science. To me, the biggest message is how much it's accelerating. I mean, we've been looking at this for years, but to me, the more impactful is looking even just months away, how much things have changed in the last 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, right? How quickly it's accelerating. The core change that I would highlight is a real a push for in silico design and in silico evaluation of compounds. Real shift from, a real delay of the wet chemistry, I would say. So I see the industry doing a lot more in the design space, delaying when and how they make molecules until they have a good set of candidates generated in silico, predictions, generated in silico, selections of compounds in silico before they begin applying the wet chemistry. It's obvious because that's where a lot of the expense is, and if it can be avoided, if you can make less compounds and still have a high level of success, that shortens life cycles, which is the most important thing in our industries, and also saves cost. That's become, I think, much more possible these days because of AI and machine learning models. It's not like in silico design hasn't existed for the last 30 years or 40 years, right? Many of us, have worked with computational chemists or computational chemists. There have been models to generate compounds, models to assess properties.
Choose some models, yes, yeah.
It's not that in silico design is a new discipline. Is that the level at which is going to be used, the scale at which is going to be used, is being transformed by the new technologies. And I would highlight that the key change is a shift from, not a shift, but a combination of traditional physics-based algorithms that have been in the industry for many years that rely on the understanding of the physics and detailed models to generate properties or to describe interactions with the machine learning or statistical models. And there's no free lunch. The statistical models are easier maybe to access, and there's lower barrier to getting the model itself. It's the data now that becomes the barrier. So a really important part of that transformation that we're seeing is how can we get all the data together? How can we feed the right data to the models? But the combination of the physics-based models and the machine learning models and the data is what's transforming the in silico design space, and what is changing the way that science is done. As to the impact of that in ChemDraw, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I see a real high volume of structures being handled as you can do more and more in silico de novo compound generation. I see a lot of large scale property calculations and the need for then automated screening or virtual screening of molecules. And in some ways that that takes the traditional one molecule drawn in the canvas of ChemDraw, right? It will change it into ChemDraw-enabled tools that are able to manage not one molecule at a time, but collections of molecules or libraries in a very efficient way. You're seeing some of that already with ChemDraw collections in the Signals ChemDraw offering. We recognize the need for the scientists to generate and manage the molecules and the associated data very efficiently and share it and enhance it with additional new properties or new data. So I see kind of directionally ChemDraw being more of a collection manager than a single molecule manager as we move into this high volume of in silico design.
Well, thanks very much for this very inspirational insights, David. Now to wrap up, I would like to, if you could share a personal reflection after witnessing, all this multiple transition from Cambridge-Schauf to Perkin-Elmer and now to Revvity Signals. What has remained constant in the ChemDraw philosophy and culture throughout all those changes? What are the principles that have guided the team through 4 decades of developments of ChemDraw?
I would summarize as by scientists for scientists, right? So that's been the core ethos from the very beginning. From the time Stuart Rubinstein began the journey in 1986, he was a PhD chemist, and he surrounded himself primarily with other chemists or scientists to try to build the tools that the industry needed, right? So there was that commitment that it be built by scientists, and then what we spoke about earlier, that the scientists themselves have to be an integral part of the definition of the requirements, of the prioritization of the capabilities, of dictating the direction of the product. And that has been the constant throughout. There's been some positive changes. I remember the early days of Cambridge-Soft, we were probably too far into the scientists being part of the organization that built the software. We were lacking perhaps some professional software developers, people that were trained in computer science and systems and software. And we had just scientists that could code. I think we made a transition as we became Perkin-Elmer and grew the size of the program to bring in some excellent engineering discipline and some excellent quality practices to software development that translated into a superior product. But we always maintained the core scientific foundation. In this case, now we have the product management team, and many of the field application scientists and support people are still scientists that can speak the language, that can understand what the customers are asking about, while having a very robust engineering organization behind them. And that has been constant throughout, right? The real dedication to the scientists. That's still, I think, the key to the success of Signals as a program. Now it's been transformed by the delivery mechanism, the software as a service, where now that responsiveness to the scientists is in a much more rapid engagement. So while it's true that back in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were taking feedback from the scientists, we were doing that once a year. And it would take us another year to put that information or those capabilities into the software. And it would take their IT organizations an additional year or two to roll out the software. One of the biggest sources of frustration for our teams internally was that we had built something really unique, and it was 5 years sometimes before a scientist actually got that value. What's been transformed now with the software as a service is that we do that release and that deployment for everybody in the industry upwards of 10 times a year, so that feedback loop is much more rapid. And when a scientist talks to one of our product managers or our FAS specialist and gives us some input, often it comes out in weeks or months, not years. And they learn that, and then they really engage with us in making the product better. So I'm ever more excited about the possibilities of the next generation of AI, and in silico design being fed into the product through this very rapid cooperation with the actual users on the ground that are doing the science.
All right. Thank you very much, David, for having shared, all this history, this evolution of ChemDraw, and provided insight into actually the future of this fantastic tool. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
All right. With that, I'm going to wrap up by letting you know that there are going to be more events celebrating the 40th anniversary of ChemDraw. The upcoming one is actually ACS Fall in Washington, that is in late August. Please stop by our booth if you are attending. As booth number 2324, we are going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of ChemDraw. This time again, with some exclusive giveaways, some live demos, and a look at the future of chemical drawing with us. Also, if you want to know more about the 40th anniversary, we have a webpage at revvitysignals.com/chemdraw-turns-40. And I cannot resist actually showing you a video there. So let's move to the page where we celebrate the 40th anniversary. And I'm going to play that video for you as a final show.
Yes.
Celebrating 40 years of ChemDraw by Revvity Signals.
All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. We'll share comments a bit later, but I would like to appreciate your attendance. And you can play the recording in a few hours of time before we publish it on our website. Thanks very much.